Okay, great. And then last question over here, question 5. It says a convergent geometric series consisting of only positive terms. Okay, very important. Has its first input as n equals 3. It has the sigma sign. It goes all the way up to infinity. That's where the convergent comes from, because we're in between -1 and 1 for our ratio. And then they told us Tn, so that's unknown, but this whole sequence equals 1/4. So when we have our first term plus second term plus all of them all the way up to infinity, the whole final value equals 1/4. Okay, so that's our interpretation for sigma over here, and T1 plus T2 equals 2. So we've been given this information and we have questions that lead into each other in terms of A and R. Okay, so convergent geometric, it also means we're working with this formula, S infinity equals A over 1 minus R. So 5.1 over here says write an expression for A in terms of R. So they want A in terms of R. So what we want to do is look at this portion over here, because T1 plus T2 equals 2. And what we spoke about when we were looking at the proof, how we split things up in terms of A plus D, in this case we're doing that but with a geometric, because we have A that's represented by term 1, and the second term is A multiplied by R, because the third term would then be A multiplied by R squared, and that would repeat. But what we know is that T1 is A, T2 is A plus R, and this equals 2 based on what they told us, which means we can set this equation up and we can factorize our A out, because we want to get an expression for A by itself in terms of R, which means we have A brackets 1 plus R over there, and that equals 2. From there, we can isolate for A by taking our 1 plus R to the bottom, the denominator of the right side, because we're dividing it on both sides. So we have 2 divided by 1 plus R. And this just earned us 2 marks because we wrote the expression for A in terms of R. So there's just an R here and an A. It means we can't do any other variation if there's an N in here, for example, or something like that. So the only two unknowns are A and R, and that's our best way forward, because that helps us with 5.2. Because 5.2 says determine the values of A and R. Okay, this is a 5-mark question and the last question for this section. So what we need to do is we need to work inside our S infinity formula. Because right now we've dealt with this portion. The only portion we haven't dealt with is our S infinity formula that this sigma represents. Because now we have A in terms of R, which means we can go ahead and plug A in. But one thing to keep in mind is that A in this case isn't 2 over 1 plus R. Because as we were talking about initially, T1, T2, T3, so A represents the first term, and in this case we have 2 over 1 plus R. But this restriction over here is telling us that the first number we put in is the third term, which means that our T2, as we were doing here, we multiply by R, becomes 2R over 1 plus R. And then T3 becomes 2R squared, because we keep multiplying by R. And top times top, bottom times bottom, it means the R only joins the top. Which means we don't want to put in A, because A is the first term, but they're telling us that our first value that we actually plug in to this whole equation is the third term. Okay, which means we have to go ahead and put 2R squared over 1 plus R. So we have 2R squared there over 1 plus R in brackets. And then at the bottom, we have 1 minus R still. And we could put 2R squared over 1 plus R over 1 minus R. But a nice way is to just move our denominator down and it joins, because top times top, bottom times bottom. Because now at this stage, we can almost solve for R. We just need to see that, okay, whatever this unknown sequence is, this whole series, this S infinity, adds up to 1/4. Because now we have the value for S infinity that was also given to us over here. Because from there, we can then go ahead and cross multiply. 4 multiplied by 2 is 8R squared. 1 by itself is 1. And then we have our 2 brackets up top. From here, we can then go ahead and FOIL things, because what we have is dots. So 1 multiplied by 1 is 1. 1 multiplied by -R is -R. R multiplied by 1 is positive R. Those two guys will cancel. And then positive R multiplied by -R is -R squared. So this equals 8R squared. Then we can go ahead, take our R squared to the same side. So we have 9R squared on the right. 8R squared plus R squared is 9R squared, and that equals 1. We can then divide by 9 on both sides, and we have 1/9 equals R squared. From there, we take the square root. We have plus and minus because we took the square root, and that's the same as doing dots. And then the square root of 1 is 1, and the square root of 9 is 3. So we have have plus or minus 1 over 3 is our r. But then we've dealt with the convergent, we've dealt with the sigma, we've dealt with this portion. It's telling us only has positive terms, okay, because that means we cannot have a negative 1 over 3 over here, because multiplying anything by negative will give us a negative term, and then a positive term, and then a negative term again. So now we had 9 multiplied by negative 2 is minus 18, multiplied by negative 2 is positive 36, and we don't want that. We only want positive to positive to positive, and that means our ratio has to be positive overall, okay? And then at this stage, we've solved for r as positive 1 over 3, and then we're working with 5.1 over here to help us solve it, because a is what we want. We have 2 over 1 plus 1 over 3, the r that we just calculated, and then we can go ahead and solve for a, because a equals 3 over 2. And that is our final answer over there. So 5.2, determine the values of a and r. We just calculated those for 5 marks. Great job, guys. Let me know if there are any questions in the comments below, and otherwise I will see you in the next video.